Hey guys, welcome back to the What Comes to Mind series. Today we are on episode 10. That's 10 episodes. One, two, you know how to count. And we are going to talk about the pancreas today. So in terms of the pancreas itself, it's actually located mostly behind our stomach. So in medical terms, that's what we mean by posterior. So it's posterior to the stomach mostly. And something is towards the front of the body, we call it anterior. And it has two main functions in essence. One is to aid digestion, and one is to help regulate blood sugar levels. I kind of just want you to enjoy the scenery. Right. So, in terms of the pancreas and its actual function, there's a little region in the pancreas which has a name that I'll never ever forget, because it sounds like it's a form of some secret military base. And that region actually is called the islet of Langerhans. So the region in the pancreas where certain cells are located and they produce certain hormones. So we've got alpha, beta, and delta cells. Alpha, beta, and delta cells. Now, to go into the detail about those particular hormones and those cells, the alpha cells secrete a hormone known as glucagon, which actually helps to prevent glucose levels going too low in the body. So it kind of talks to the liver and tells the liver to process a molecule known as glycogen into glucose, so this increases the glucose levels around the body. So it has an opposite function to insulin. Now with insulin, which is secreted by the beta cells or beta cells, helps to make use of the glucose that's actually circulating around the body. So once you eat something that has some sugar in it, some glucose in, the pancreas secretes insulin so it can go and process to make use of that sugar, so the body can process it as a fuel source for the cells to function and all sorts of actions that our body generally does. But interestingly, the delta cells produce something known as somatostatin, and not as much research is done into that compared to insulin and glucagon. But what somatostatin does, it inhibits the release of the other two hormones. So glucagon from the alpha cells and insulin from the beta cells. So something interesting to see that you've got these alpha, beta, and delta cells located in a very cool name, which is known as the islet of Langerhans. And it shows the power of these certain hormones. These are peptides, these are proteins that help to increase glucose, decrease glucose, prevent the release. So it shows how pivotal our pancreas is to maintaining our general daily function life. Now, before I share what comes to mind when I think of the pancreas, I want to tell you a interesting and quite funny story with regards to the pancreas. So in London, there is a train station called St Pancras train station. And when I was younger, I didn't really go to London that much. So I wasn't aware of the different train stations and the different terminologies and parts of London, which many people might know even from abroad. So I used to get laughed at every time or laughed if you're from London, about the train station, because I actually used to say, when are we going to St Pancreas train station? And I didn't really know, because I genuinely forgot or looked over the word. It's Pancras. So if you just read it in passing, you think it's pancreas. So even at an early age, I was just thinking about science stuff and medical stuff and forgetting it's actually St Pancras, not St Pancreas train station. So every time I think of that train station, I generally think of the pancreas and diabetes and stuff like that. So little fun fact. So I'm sure you're gonna say pancreas now, jokes in the comments, which is fine, no problem. And I will correct you and say no, it's the St Pancras train station. But in terms of what comes to mind, generally when I think of the word pancreas, the word sympathy actually comes to mind. And it sounds a bit off tangent, a bit weird, but when you look at different organs in the body, the pancreas generally in modern day lifestyle is overworked, and you can even say sort of underpaid, because of the insulinogenic type foods, so things that cause insulin spikes, high glycemic foods, so foods that cause a spike in blood sugar, start to overwork the pancreas. So whenever I think, when somebody's talking about the pancreas, or when I think of diabetes and stuff like that, I generally feel sorry for the pancreas. And sometimes what we all do without realizing, the foods that we have, we may not think how damaging it can be to the pancreas over time if we consistently keep having it. So one thing that comes to mind is actually sympathy and feeling sorry for the pancreas. And number two, which probably in line with a lot of people, is we think of diabetes, and in particular type 2 diabetes for me. So when I think of the pancreas, I generally think of type 2 diabetes. And the reason why I think of diabetes in regards to the pancreas is just like we think of the heart and we relate to cardiovascular disease, we can think of the pancreas relating it to diabetes. And in the research world, in the medical world, we see the serious complications I'm going to talk about in a few minutes that arise from forms of diabetes that, if left untreated, if are poorly managed, can cause some serious and sometimes frightening conditions and side effects from having diabetes long term. So the complications that can arise are quite devastating. And so although I mentioned earlier about feeling sorry for the pancreas and how it can be overworked, as a result of not looking after that bit, diabetes can manifest, and different forms of diabetes. And so that's generally the two things that come to mind when I think of the word pancreas. And it's both hand in hand that I feel sorry for the pancreas itself, and also unfortunately feel sorry for those who have type 2 diabetes in particular, because of the situation that arose to get that form of diabetes. Some can be self-inflicted without realizing, some can be genetic predisposition. Whichever the root or the cause, it's sometimes really unfair that you have to now constantly check your sugar levels, whether it's drug management or lifestyle management, whatever it may be. Is not an easy thing to cope with. Just as I mentioned yesterday about asthma, it's not a difficult thing, not an easy thing to cope with. Having diabetes and serious complications from diabetes is quite severe as well. And it's not just popping a pill and then your sugars are fine. Some have serious general complications where pumps are needed, bags are needed, amputations are needed. And it's sometimes quite tragic that just having elevated sugar levels, as simple as it may sound, can really, really damage your body. Because high levels of sugar, if left untreated, is linked to inflammation. And a few days ago, I talked about the complications that can arise from inflammation itself. And sugar and high levels of sugar is a big cause of inflammation around the body. And I want to elaborate on those serious complications just to give you an insight, if you don't know already, how dangerous those elevated sugar levels can be to your body if left untreated. So there's different, you can say, pathies, so neuropathy, nephropathy, retinopathy, and what these mean is damage to that particular area. So to start off with neuropathy, if there's elevated sugar levels, it can actually damage the neurons, so you lose sensation in that feeling. So severe or kind of end-stage diabetes, life-threatening diabetes, they can have something called neuropathy, where they lose the feeling and sensation in their feet. So infections can arise without them realizing, and even in some cases, people require amputations because of a form of diabetes, because they lost that feeling and sensation in their legs or in their feet. Now going on to nephropathy, so damage to the kidneys. People who have end-stage diabetes can have kidney failure, kidney damage, because the elevated sugar can damage the filtration process that's in the kidneys. It can damage the proteins, the process in there. So you can see how you've gone from losing sensation in neurons to damaging the kidney structure and what we call the glomerular filtration system in the kidney. Same sugar, two completely different complications. And then to add lastly, there's something called retinopathy, where people can actually have cataracts. So that's clouding of the lens, so you can't really see that properly due to excess sugar that's built up around the eye. So that's just a few complications that can arise from, in essence, having excess sugar in the body that the body can't process as well as somebody who doesn't have diabetes. And I find that sometimes quite scary. That I mentioned again yesterday about those who can't breathe properly because of some inflammation in the airways. These are now amputations, cataracts, kidney failure from potential excess sugar that can't be controlled that well, or for more complications, it can't be processed, it can't be looked after, and that's unfortunate. It really, really, really is. And I pray for those in research in that area that we can do our best to try and minimize those serious complications from actually occurring, and it hurts, sometimes it actually really hurts. That I genuinely feel sorry for those who may have to go through those things. And I pray we can try and try to prevent the preventable and minimize those who don't have to get to that stage. In terms of diseases that are associated with the pancreas, many of us will remember type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, or something called chronic pancreatitis. But there's actually a lot more variants of diabetes than just the type 1 and type 2. So to start off with, we know about type 1 is more of a autoimmune disorder from a viral infection for genetic anomaly. It generally occurs in people who are a lot younger, and it happens quite sudden. And it's when then a person cannot produce any insulin at all within reason. But then type 2 is something that generally manifests over time. It's seen a lot later on in individuals. It's more from high blood pressure, weight gain, the receptors becoming desensitized, so very less insulin is secreted than a normal person. So the person requires a lot longer to process the circulating sugar compared to a healthy individual. And that's where a lot of the sugar then gets stored, so you have that weight gain, you get the high blood pressure, you get those kind of characteristic type 2 complications with a person who has type 2. So type 1, more autoimmune, can't produce much insulin at all. Type 2, generally lifestyle factors, however there's a lot more to it. But it's when the person can't produce as much insulin as a healthy individual. But there's actually a lot more variants, which I'm going to go into now. For instance, there's a mature onset diabetes where it may have similarities between type 2, but generally patients here have some genetic abnormality, which they start to produce less insulin as they get older. So it's very something similar to type 2, but slightly different to type 2 diabetes. And there are also complications with other diseases. So something like cystic fibrosis, which is a buildup of excess mucus that is uncontrollable to process, can actually start to scar. So that thick, heavy mucus starts to scar the pancreas. Now, similar to what I mentioned yesterday about the lungs and the lungs being scarred, when the pancreas gets scarred, it can't produce the hormones, the cells can't produce hormones that it normally does. And by consequence, you actually start to have less insulin production, mimicking diabetes. So you also have something that's called cystic fibrosis-induced diabetes, which is a serious complication because the person's already suffering from something that's quite difficult to cope with. But those thick mucus can now affect another organ, like the pancreas, and start to form diabetic-like complications. There's something called type 1.5 diabetes, in between type 1 and type 2. That's his unofficial name. His official name is LADA, so LADA, which stands for latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood. And the reason why is it actually shows similarities between both typical forms of diabetes. So the autoimmune is characteristic of type 1, but the latent and delayed onset in more adulthood is more characteristic of type 2. So this actual form of diabetes can be misdiagnosed as type 2 or mature, but the autoimmune nature helps it to form characteristics towards type 1 diabetes. So similarities in terms of you can say complications that arise are similar to both. Some have weight gain or weight loss. So again, people who have type 1 diabetes have more weight loss because they're just burning fats as energy store because they actually can't process sugar. So it's then a lot more complicated than just looking at, okay, weight gain is type 2 and weight loss is type 1. There's actually type 1.5 diabetes, which is pretty interesting. And there's, funnily enough, a consensus in the research community about something called type 3 diabetes. Now, this is a term used to replace Alzheimer's disease in some situations, because some actually argue that genetic alterations in the APOE4 gene in the brain can actually alter the process of how cells make use of insulin. That's why Alzheimer's disease is sometimes termed type 3 diabetes in some situations. However, a lot more further research is required to establish that term. But it just shows you the breadth and range and differences between forms of diabetes. So there are all these different forms of diabetes. Some have a very heavy genetic component, some have a very lifestyle component. So what can we do to try and minimize our risk where possible? So here are a few tips that I can share that will help us to reduce our likelihood without compromising the foods that we like to enjoy and stuff like that. So I'm gonna try and balance this at the same time. See, let me know how I do. Oh, was that okay? Let me know. I think it was fairly stable. But anyway, back to what I was discussing. And that notion of something called low glycemic index and low insulin index. So just because something doesn't spike your blood sugar doesn't mean it's necessarily favorable for your pancreas. Because some things that are high in protein, maybe low in carbs, are quite insulinogenic. So they might not spike your blood sugar, but they actually spike your insulin levels. And as we mentioned in terms of type 2, the more we overspike our insulin levels, the more prone we are to something called type 2 diabetes. So that's something to be quite wary of. And so if you Google, or whichever search engine you want to use, if you Google glycemic index versus insulin index, you'll see a disparity between the two. Whereas you might be having very low glycemic foods, which is good, but some of the foods that you're eating are quite insulinogenic, meaning they're quite favorable to cause huge spikes in insulin and then tail off quite nicely. So it's kind of that short-term spike that is really heavy on the pancreas. That's very common with a lot of unfortunate junk foods that cause that simple sugar spike, which is an unfortunate problem. So again, have a look at something called glycemic index and insulin index, which is quite useful. Another one, which is something I've done for the past 30 days, is fasting. Give your body a rest, give your pancreas a rest, is what I think about it. So the analogy I like to use, which always comes to mind actually, is think of a parcel service. And if you're constantly taking in food, think of the food as parcels. That whole warehouse, that whole kind of conveyor belt has to process all the food that's coming in, it has to deal with it. And if there's complications in the warehouse, like there's some buildup of some parcels that need to be sorted out, there's some issues with the conveyor belt, it doesn't have time to do that because it's sorting all the food that's coming in. That's what the pancreas has to do as well. So if you stop eating, so a form of fasting, nothing is coming in through the door. So that the actual delivery process and the parcel service can actually look after what's going on in the warehouse. They can identify, okay, that needs to be sorted out, that needs to be sorted out, that needs to be sorted out, and you can start to look after yourself over time. Your pancreas then actually gets the rest. If you take no food in, there will be no insulin spike. It's kind of that simple in that regard. Naturally, we snack quite a lot, and we are all, me included, all guilty of this, where every so often we snack. So there's this constant insulin production over time in our body, which is not favorable for our pancreas. So stop snacking. I'm looking at the phone to tell me as well. So try your best to have some form of fasting in your general daily lives, where you can give your pancreas and the rest of your body an actual rest. And last one, which we can all do in some capacity, is exercise. I mentioned, remember, nutrition, exercise and psychology. And the more we exercise, the more we enjoy exercise, the more we're making use of the potential excess sugar that's in our bloods, and we can make use of it where possible. And what I want to conclude on is we want to try our best to prevent the buildup of excess sugar in our blood being circulated day in, day out. Because one, that is inflammatory for the rest of the body, and two, we're utilizing insulin more than we actually should, which is not favorable for our pancreas. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video about the pancreas and all of the advices I tried to share. Sorry if I rambled on in times, but I hope you still did benefit and got to see some of nature. Let me know your thoughts about what comes to mind when you think of the term pancreas in the comment section below if you can. Try and subscribe so you can enjoy the rest of the series, because we've got another 20 episodes coming along, which I hope you guys can also benefit and enjoy from. And I hope to see you tomorrow now for episode 11 of the What Comes to Mind series. See you soon. Bye bye.